Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. For today's video, I thought I would do something kind of different. So I really enjoy watching like beauty YouTubers who like get ready while they talk about true crime. Bailey Sarian, Bella Flory, they kind of do that. But I just like hearing about true crime. I don't like doing research on my own. So I'll listen to like My Favorite Murder and then watch those two girls, and that's like the extent of which I can take because it is just kind of heavy. However, something that I do really love like researching and learning about and watching like documentaries about is musicians. I am an avid music lover. I am not musically inclined at all, but I think everyone has like a place in the world for music, and I just like obsess over music, and I have all this random knowledge up in my noggin about musicians and artists and bands. So I thought I would kind of do my own take on their videos, and I'm going to talk about an artist or band and just kind of get ready with you guys. So since today's the first one that I'm doing, I thought I would talk about a band that I really love, and that is Fleetwood Mac. There's like a huge history behind the band. There's a lot of that people already know, and then some that people don't know. There's a lot I didn't know about the band, and I just had a lot of fun researching. So I'm going to just kind of do my makeup. I already have a little bit of my base done, and we will get into it. I'll also list everything I'm using down below because I'm not really talking about the makeup so much. But yeah, let's get into it. So in the late 60s, there was a guy, his name was Mick Fleetwood. And he was really good friends with this other dude, Peter Green. And they were really into like American blues music. In the 60s and the 70s, there were a lot of UK artists who were just really into like American blues. Eric Clapton is a big one of them. They wanted to kind of like form their own band and play like music inspired by the blues, and you know, that was just like the thing at the time. So Fleetwood and Green, they ended up getting together with two other guys. They got together with John McVie, who played the bass guitar, and Jeremy Spencer, who was also another guitarist. So they released their first album, and it was like, it did pretty well. It did well in the UK. Their album had a few hits. The biggest one was Albatross, and I think it got to like number 3 in the UK. That album now throughout history is known because there was like hits that were later made famous by other artists. So Black Magic Woman was on there, which would later be made famous by Mr. Santana himself, which I love that song, and I had no idea it was a Fleetwood Mac song, so that's kind of crazy. Also, the album and the band was, at the time, they were Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac, and so it was just kind of like a monogram of the guys' names. So it's a very different Fleetwood Mac than we all kind of know. So after the first album, McVie, the bass guitarist, he had been dating this woman, and she, on their first album, did like some vocals for them, like just like background vocals and a little bit of the keyboard. She played the keyboard like no other, and so she had helped them out on their album. Well, John decided to marry Christine, and he also asked like his other band members if she could join the band. He just thought she was a great addition, and they all agreed because she had helped on the first album. That is when Christine, now McVie, used to be Perfect, joins Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac. So from 1970 to 1974, this is kind of when like the biggest change happens within the band. Peter Green and Jeremy Spencer decide that they no longer want to be in the band, and they just kind of wanted to go off and do their own things. It wasn't like, from everything I read, it wasn't like a hostile environment at the time, which we will touch on later. They wanted to just like go off and do their own thing and really focus on the blues, whereas I think Fleetwood really wanted to get into like kind of pop rock and become more mainstream. He wanted more success for the band, and they weren't really going to see that doing the type of music in the UK that they were doing at the time. So they leave. So they really just like needed to, if they wanted to stay together, they needed to find someone. So I call this the era of Bobs. They hire Bob Welch and Bob Weston, and they join, and they also needed someone to do vocals because the two Bobs were playing the guitar. They hired this man by the name of Dave Walker. By 74, all three of the guys that had just entered the band also leave the band, and they just like weren't a good fit. In 74, Fleetwood goes out to LA, and he is just looking for like a space for Fleetwood Mac to record. So I don't know if I touched on this. Once Peter Green left, because the band's name was Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac, they just dropped Peter Green, and this is when they become Fleetwood Mac. So Fleetwood is out in LA, and he's just looking for a studio, and someone introduces him to Lindsey Buckingham. Fleetwood actually goes to see Buckingham do like a show, and at the time Buckingham had just released an album with his then girlfriend Stevie Nicks, and they didn't actually do that well on the first album, and so they were just kind of trying to find like their rhythm. But Fleetwood goes to a concert, and he's like, wow, I really like this Lindsey Buckingham guy. I'm gonna ask him to join Fleetwood Mac because we need a guitarist, we need someone to do vocals, so I think he would do a pretty good job. So he goes to Buckingham, and he's like, hey, would you like to be a part of my band? Buckingham had heard of Fleetwood because their album had kind of trickled over to the US, and so he knew of them, and he was like, sure, but I'm going to give you one condition. Stevie Nicks has to come with me. Like, we're a package deal. I'm not leaving her behind. So if you want me, you have to also accept her into the band. And obviously Fleetwood says yes. You have Christine McVie, John McVie, Mick Fleetwood, Lindsey Buckingham, and Stevie Nicks. So the band quickly, once they had formed, they got to work to produce their first album. So within a year, their first album was released. It was a self-titled album. It was just Fleetwood Mac, and it ended up doing extremely well. I think kind of better than anyone really expected. It rose to #1 in the UK and the US, and this is kind of when they went from being known for like British blues to American like pop, rock, like folk kind of sound, which was like all the rage in the 70s. And it just really worked for the band. They were all pretty happy with the sound. So after they released their first album, they ended up going on tour. This is kind of where things started getting a little bad. The band was like constantly together, and they were constantly touring, and it just took a toll on everyone's relationship. At the same time of them touring, they're writing their second studio album, which would later go on to be Rumours. The history of Rumours is kind of like how everyone really knows Fleetwood Mac. Like I said, they were like just together all the time, and it became like just a really toxic environment. On top of that, they were all kind of doing drugs. So, you know, they didn't want to be around each other. They were all doing drugs. Things just started taking a turn for the worst. Christine and John decided that they no longer wanted to be married. They were just not a good fit for each other. So they ended up filing for divorce. And it's just like extremely toxic for them. They actually don't speak to each other unless it's like music related. Like if they were writing music, that was like really the only time they communicated with each other. Other than that, they really just like stayed clear of each other. It just got to the point where like they could not, you know, be around each other. At the same time, Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks, they are also like, they're just constantly getting back together and breaking up and getting back together. And it was no good for the band or like anyone's sanity. They were just constantly fighting and on drugs. Which it's funny because Stevie Nicks, like later on, she would like attribute a lot of their success to that factor. She was like, they just, you know, they tended to perform better when things were like really volatile. Also, poor Mick, who's already like the biggest third wheel of all time, because you have Christine and John who are together, Lindsey and Stevie who are together, and they're all going through their crap. He has to deal with stuff on his own, and at home, his wife had been cheating on him with his best friend, and she was the mother of their 2 children, and so this just like broke Mick apart, because he just felt so alone. Like he couldn't go to his band members with this kind of stuff because they were all, you know, hurting each other and cheating on each other and stuff like that. So he was just like dealing with their stuff and then his own stuff back at home. Well, the press could not get enough of all of this information coming out about the band. The media made it a point to constantly publish information about the band, whether it was true or not. They were just like, they could not get enough about the rumors that were like swirling between all of them. And so they were just like releasing things non-stop about the band. They said that one of John's children was actually Stevie and Buckingham's like love child, because they were seen out with the kid. And they also said that Christine was like dying in the hospital. I think she had like gone to the hospital for something, but like it wasn't very serious, and they like really, the media blew it out of proportion. They just kind of, you know, ran with that story, and they're like, she's dying, how is Fleetwood Mac going to continue? Also, look at all this other stuff that was actually happening, and so they just really like pushed kind of the band to their limits. And so the band was obviously recording Rumours at the time, which was a dig at each other and also a dig at the media for, you know, all the information that they had been releasing and fabricating. So once they were done recording the album, it took longer than they expected. There was like some complications when they were sound mixing and all of that good stuff. So like the fans of Fleetwood Mac were just like ready for this album. They wanted it, and they were not getting it in like the time that, you know, they felt was adequate. So that was like another stressor on the band, was just, you know, how long it took the album to be released. Okay, so the album finally comes out, and, you know, this album just really reflected what was happening at the time. Dreams and Go Your Own Way were basically like diss tracks of their time, that Lindsay and Stevie kind of aimed at one another. But the album was just like massively successful. Like, you know, they had anticipated it doing well because of how well their first self-titled album did, but no one really imagined that it could have like gone to the scale that it did. And a lot of this was, you know, attributed to the fact that the press had just kind of like released all of these rumors. You know, everyone just wanted to see like, what is this all about? Like, what is going on with Fleetwood Mac? And, you know, the album itself just, it did amazing. They won a Grammy that year for Best Album. So they were just like, you know, yeah, they were in a toxic environment with each other, but they were producing some of the best music. Rumours, the band with the 5 members went on to make 3 more studio albums. So the first one that would come out was Tusk, and that was in 1979, and that was kind of like an experimental album, which that was one of the albums I listened to a lot growing up, just because my dad really liked that album. In 1981, Stevie Nicks decides that she wants to kind of pursue a solo career. She wanted to go off on her own while remaining a member of Fleetwood Mac, but she wanted to, you know, produce her own stuff. So in 81, she goes off and she does her own thing, and she just becomes just this like massive success on her own, which people kind of thought would happen, because she was like asked like, hey, do you want to, you know, do this? And she was like, yes, as long as I can always remain a part of Fleetwood Mac. That was like her thing. She did not want to leave her band members behind, but she did want to, you know, pursue her own solo career. In 81, her album Belladonna comes out, and it's a huge hit. It has quite a few hits on there, but most notably was Edge of 17, and that's kind of like what really propelled her into her like own individual stardom. So she also became really good friends with Tom Petty, and he would help her on a lot of her music and vice versa. She would go on to become the first woman ever inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice, which I will touch on about Fleetwood Mac. She's inspired so many other artists, a lot of younger artists as well. Like Harry Styles attributes like a lot of his influence to Stevie. She was on American Horror Story, you know, she's like Mother of the Witches. So she just kind of like created this life for herself outside of Fleetwood Mac and really became like the star of the show, shall we say. So I just wanted to touch on Stevie for a second. While Stevie was also doing her own music, she continued to be with Fleetwood. 82, they released their album Mirage, and it did okay, but nothing had, you know, gotten to the point of Rumours. Like, Rumours was still the OG, the one and only. Then, in 1987, they released their album Tango in the Night, and this was one of their biggest hits since the Rumours era. But of course, it did not come without any challenges. It stated that Buckingham really just kind of felt like his voice wasn't being heard. They had a band meeting and they all got together, and it is rumored that Buckingham and Nix got into a physical altercation, and the day after that meeting is when Buckingham was like, I've had enough, I'm out, and so he ended up leaving the band. John, Mick, Christine, and Stevie would go on to actually still produce music. As Long As You Follow was like a huge hit, which that is a great song. And they also came out with like a greatest hits album that did pretty well. But other than that, like they did not release like a full album without him for a while. Like they just kind of, I don't think they knew what they wanted without Buckingham there. You know, they had been together for so long, and yes, things were like pretty nasty, but they were a success and they worked really well together as musically. In 1993, Bill Clinton was going to become the president, and at his inaugural ball, Fleetwood Mac played, and the original band members all got together. They kind of put their differences aside, and they all played at Bill Clinton's inaugural ball. Nothing really came from that as far as like the band getting back together. They still all kind of felt the same way about each other. My neighbor is doing something crazy out there. However, in 1996, they did decide to get back together. They had like toured here and there, and they weren't really releasing music. And it just was like a good time for Buckingham to come back into the band. They felt like, you know, they agreed upon things a little bit more than beforehand, so he rejoins Fleetwood Mac. 1998, the band actually gets inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and they most notably left out like some of the original, like the original OG Peter Green era band members. And a lot of people were actually kind of upset by this because they felt like, I believe Jeremy was the one who was left out, and they felt like that was like the reason the band had stayed together for so long was because of Jeremy, the original band. Like he kind of kept the glue together. So leaving him out, they just felt like that was kind of wrong. So the band is inducted. Stevie Nicks, who I had told you guys earlier, she was inducted 2019. And she, like I said, was the first woman inducted twice into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So that's just kind of her legacy to the world. Like she just really did a lot for rock music, folk music, just pop culture in general. Stevie Nicks was just kind of like this pioneer woman. Right after the band was inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Christine McVie decides that she no longer wants to be a part of Fleetwood Mac, and she doesn't really explain why. She just kind of was like, she was done. Like she just wanted, you know, a normal life for a little bit. She wanted to just go off and do her own thing. Ended up helping them here and there with music, but not like, she was just not as big of an influence in the band or really a member anymore. She just kind of would help them out with like a little bit of keys here and there when they needed it. From 98 to 03, the band kind of like didn't do a whole lot. They were still together, they were still writing music and did little things here and there. But in 2003, they released another album, And the album debuted at number 3 in the US, and it did pretty good. In 2008, they decided they wanted to start touring again. That was just kind of like their bread and butter, what they really missed doing altogether. So they ended up going back on tour from 2008 to 2013. And they did this without Christine. She was not a part of the tour. She was still out of the band, kind of just off doing her own thing, enjoying her life. 2014 is when Christine decided she wanted to return back into the band. And in 2018, when they were gonna like redo their tour, they were all kind of deciding on like what they wanted. And at the time, Buckingham just kind of like had differing opinions from everyone about the duration of the tour, what content they would be playing during the tour. It was just like a whole mess. They like couldn't really decide on anything. They were always fighting with each other. So this led to Buckingham eventually in 2018 deciding he couldn't do it anymore. And the band also really didn't want much to do with him. So he left, and they just kind of like, from all of the recent like news that I've seen about the band, they really just don't mention him, and if they do, they both like don't have nice things. You know, the band doesn't have nice things to say about him. He doesn't have nice things to say about the band. This time, because you know, they constantly change, things are better without him. The original 5 members always kind of find a way to, you know, make it back to one another, even though it takes a while. So that, my friends, is the history of Fleetwood Mac. They are all kind of just, you know, I don't know, they found a way to work together, but I don't think that they should be. So that, my friends, is the history of the Fleetwood Mac. So just so you kind of have a reference, this is Christine, Stevie, this is Fleetwood, Buckingham, and this is Mick V. So I plan on uploading one of these a week on my Saturday videos, so keep out for that. Also follow me on my Instagram if you don't already. I post fun little things on there all the time now, and I'm pretty active on there, so if you want like more content, follow me on there. Alright guys, I will see you in my next one. Bye!